Hello and welcome to this edition of Top of Mind Florida. I'm Michael Williams.
And I'm Brian Crowley.
It's good to have you aboard, my friend.
Glad to be here.
As always. And we have with us as our guest, Dr. Charles Zelden, Nova Southeastern University history and politics professor. I've known you for a long time. A former distinguished professor of the year, the author of numerous books, teaching courses in history, political science, legal studies, and the like. Thanks for being with us. We appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
I think the question I get from people all the time is, where are we in our history right now? And I'd be a millionaire, Brian, if I had a penny for everybody who says, are we in a constitutional crisis in the world or the like? Start off with your top of mind Florida thoughts and the kind of questions you get in the times we're living in.
We are living in a time of constitutional crisis, but in the sense that the questions and the challenges we face are constitutional in nature. They have to do with the structure of government, the structure of society, interactions between government and people, interactions between people under the law, the nature, the state of the law, the rule of law. These are all issues that are being challenged now by the issues we face, by the politics we hold, by the differences we have. And that makes this a constitutional crisis because ultimately the answers have to come within the context of the Constitution, or we don't have a nation.
But how in a polarized world do you come to any kind of meeting ground when some will say, good, we need that shakeup. Others are scared to death about it.
Well, the key element here is that it's not going to be that everyone agrees. We always have differences of opinion. We've always had opposition parties. We've always had opposition attitudes. We've always had conflicts between the North and the South, the East and the West, rural and urban. But ultimately, we agreed on the foundations of what made this country. When we didn't, we had a civil war. That was a real constitutional crisis. We are debating many of the same issues that came up during the Civil War, about the nature of government, about the nature of society, about the nature of politics and our interactions between regions, between people, between government and us, the people. And we're not going to all agree on the answers, but we have to agree on the context in which we debate the argument. To the extent that we can agree on the context of which we'll argue, that the Constitution is the foundation and that we have to work within the Constitution, we're fine. It's a crisis, but we're fine. It's a crisis we've had many times throughout American history. To the extent that we are unwilling to accept the primacy of our constitutional order, then we're talking the sort of crisis that came in the 1860s and resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Americans.
Recently, the Trump administration, the Justice Department, sued the federal judges of Maryland. Has that ever been done before? What's the potential impact of that?
It really hasn't been done before, in which the government sues against an entire bench and says what you're doing is improper. Usually what happens is that you simply take a decision from that bench, it gets appealed to a higher court, and then you make the argument that what they're doing is improper, what they're doing is unacceptable, what they're doing is wrong, it's unconstitutional. It's like they're cutting out the middleman. But ultimately the decision as to the validity of what these judges are doing will come from the Supreme Court. So it's going to still stay within the court system.
Historically, is this Supreme Court facing more constitutional questions than any other Supreme Court, or is this not unusual at all?
It's not unusual for the court to have foundational constitutional issues, questions that are not easy to answer, that go to the essence of how we organize our society. Abortion, school prayer. These are fundamental constitutional issues that the courts have dealt with over the years in the 18th, 19th, and the 20th centuries, and now the 21st century. What we're getting now is a lot of verbiage and conflict around the questions that are being answered, in that you have a president and an administration that wants to win these fights as much on the political realm as on the constitutional realm, the legal realm. And that is, I won't say it's new, it's happened before, but it is problematical.
Give us particular examples that you're thinking about here.
Well, the approach that the Trump administration is having towards immigration enforcement, basically saying that we will arrest judges who get in the way of immigration enforcement, even though the judges will simply saying, we're simply doing our job. We're doing our job the way it's supposed to be done. That is a constitutional legal question, but where it's really being fought is in the public realm for support for Donald Trump's immigration policies or opposition to those immigration policies.
And we should say some in his administration have said that. There have been no such arrests. Some argue it's hyperbole, but in your mind, it's the kind we need to pay a lot of attention to.
There has been one judge that's been
Wisconsin.
arrested. Yes, in Wisconsin.
Excuse me, that's right.
And now, of course, suit brought
Allegedly
against
for
an entire
showing
bench in
somebody
Maryland.
their way out the courthouse door and subverting the ability to take this person into custody.
And simply saying you can go out that way instead of you can go out that way.
That was
as
in
simple as
Wisconsin.
that. Yes.
Are we in an inflection point for American democracy when you talk about and trace some of what you're thinking about all the way back to the Civil War? Again, we live in a society who said, that's a scare tactic. We need changes. Others do worry that we're in an inflection point. Where do you stand?
We're always at an inflection point constitutionally, in that we're always faced with fundamental questions about the nature of American government, society, the economy, and these answers that we give will shape the world we live in. And in that sense, there's nothing new about what we're facing. It's just there's a lot more screaming and yelling going on than is the norm in this area. But on a sort of a deeper level, there are people today who fundamentally question the validity of our constitutional system, of the rule of law, of the political powers, of Congress, of the courts. To the extent that they do that, that is a challenge to governance in America. And if that view becomes the majority, then we are in line for a lot of change.
Ryan?
Keeping an eye out on Supreme Court opinions that have been coming. So
And that's a lengthy list to keep track of.
List of Supreme Court opinions.
They've got to get them in by today.
What do you think is the most important thing that the Supreme Court did this term?
Oh, that's a tough question because it's done a lot. It's the biggest issue has been, to what extent does the Supreme Court support the policy changes of the Trump administration? And here the answer is it's been mixed. There have been areas where the court has said, in alliance, in conjunction with lower courts, you can't do that. That's not the way we do it in this country. You can't just simply arrest people and send them off to El Salvador. You have to give them due process. You have to give them a chance to challenge their arrest. You have to give them a chance to challenge the validity of the charges brought against them. At the same time, was it just yesterday? I mean, it was very recently that the Supreme Court basically said it's okay to send people and return them to countries that are not their country of origin when you deport them, which is a big change in our immigration laws. That you could send somebody to South Sudan when they're Guatemalan. To the extent that the Supreme Court is enforcing that attitude, they're empowering the Trump administration's attempt to change the immigration policy. To the extent that they come back and say, well, you can't quite do that, you got to give them due process, they're opposing it. So the court's sort of been hemming and hawing, feeling its way over the nature of the legitimacy of the policy changes being proposed by Donald Trump.
And when you're talking to students or when you're out at seminars, what do you say to people? And there'll be a good number of them watching and listening to Top of Mind Florida will say, good. We elected him. We didn't elect them. You've heard the arguments. Good. We need more power vested in the executive. Good. We like what he's doing. What do you say to that argument, which I'm sure you hear?
Well, what it comes down to is this. Be careful what you wish for. Too much power in the hands of one branch of government results in an imbalance. The foundation of American government is we don't want it to be too powerful. We don't. We've created a governmental system that was intentionally inefficient, ineffective, slow to move, except when everyone agreed. So the way you do it is you have to have Congress, the legislatures who represent the people direct. You have to have the judges who are appointed and who represent the law and the Constitution, and the president who represents the nation as a whole. Where they all agree, you can do what you want, we can move fast. I mean, think about our response to 9/11. How powerful our response was in the 6 months following 9/11. The president had the absolute free hand to do what he wanted because he had the support of Congress and the courts. But what happens when the president doesn't give back that freedom of movement? When he claims, I have the authority and my way is the main way. And that's not the structure of government that our founders created. That's not originalism. That's not the structure of government that we have. And the danger, which the founders understood, was if you put too much power on one man or one institution, Congress or the courts, what you end up with is an imbalanced government and potential for corruption, potential for unconstitutional behavior, a potential for oppression.
So on the court's last day of making decisions, they decided that universal injunctions likely exceed the equitable authority that Congress has given to the federal courts. So an appeals court in Texas can't decide for the entire nation, or a circuit court. So it's big.
It's very big because it gets to the structure of the power of the courts to check the president. Suddenly, courts, district courts, trial courts no longer have the ability to say, this is constitutionally wrong, therefore stop. They can say stop in my district, but not stop across the nation. We can say stop in my circuit, but not stop across the nation. What they've done is they've basically said the Supreme Court has to decide for the nation as a whole on these issues. They've increased their workload.
They may have to take shorter summer vacations.
They may need to take no summer vacations if they're going to hear all the cases in which these issues come up. At the same time, they are undermining the ability of checks and balances to work. The check of the courts has always been that under law they can say this has not been appropriately applied under the Constitution, and therefore stop. Don't do that. Now, you can appeal it, and a higher court can say, nope, it is properly applied. Go back and do it. But the ability of the courts to say, stop, hold, let's take time on this, that's been taken away if what you're saying is accurate. And I have no reason to believe that it isn't accurate. Let's hope the reporting is going to be more nuanced as there are deeper readings of these opinions. If the opinions come out, you don't have a lot of time to read them before you have to announce them.
Sure.
But this may be the most important opinion the court has issued this term.
But isn't there an argument that the trend of federal judges declaring something was nationwide had expanded?
It's very frustrating. If you are a liberal and a conservative judge says you can't have abortions nationwide, you're very frustrated.
Or vice versa.
Or if you are a conservative and you believe that there needs to be work done on immigration, and a judge says you can't deport people, very frustrating. But the whole point of the government, the whole structure of government, what makes it safe, which makes it workable, is that people get frustrated because we're forcing us to take time to build consensus and agreement.
Do we now have what effectively would be, as Brian continues, and I love this guy, he's been a bulldog for 40 plus years. He's always got the latest as you continue to see any write-ups on this just coming from Supreme Court. As we tape this Top of Mind Florida podcast, Brian's continuing to check. Once a news bulldog, always a news bulldog. To my question, though, do we now end up with a hodgepodge where one district court will decide this, and it may apply in that state? Could be this similar issue that in another state will be decided differently, and you have a hodgepodge of interpretations until it reaches that crowded court docket for the U.S. Supreme Court that will apply state by state in the meantime.
Yes, it will, district by district. There was a district judge in Texas who ruled you couldn't send people off to El Salvador, and the rule is applicable in Harris County in South Texas, but not South Florida. Now, what would happen is judges would say, and this is applicable across the nation. And then it would be up to a circuit court to decide, is that an application that is valid? If they say yes, then it goes to the Supreme Court. It is a check on the process to slow us down while we argue out the details of this position and what is proper and what is the policy of the United States. When you only can do it for your circuit or for your district, it creates what's called conflicts of laws. And that creates problems because then where you live may determine what the law is for you. And it may be different in Houston than it is here in West Palm Beach.
Is the arc of what you've seen in the last year from the Supreme Court's decision on a sitting president's immunity, his ability to be shielded from acts while sitting as president, that his critics argue have led to what they complain are excesses, his critics, I would say, to decisions like the one today that Brian just let us know about? Does all of that speak to you about a U.S. Supreme Court that's very much leaning towards accruing more power for an executive?
Yes.
And then what does it say? So right now, conservatives would argue that's great, but it's the be careful what you wish for, because sooner or later, you will end up with somebody who's a liberal back in the White House, and the same rules will apply. Talk about all of that.
Well, if they apply.
If they apply.
There's a certain case of
but
under,
you see my
under the
point.
courts.
It's like, oh, it's great right now. What happens?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, no, you're perfectly correct. What we have now is a court that's basically saying I'll go as far as saying we have a unitary president, that the president should have all the power appropriate to an executive, all the powers appropriate to an executive, without checks, without balances, without limits, and that the other branches can't hinder the president in carrying out his duties as executive. That is wonderful when your guy's in charge. But the minute the other guy gets in charge and starts changing things around, well, again, be careful what you wish for. What'll happen is that people will come immediately to the courts and challenge it, and then it's a question of, to what extent is this court granting power to the executive in general, and to what extent are they granting power to the executive, in particular this executive?
So in the 6-3 opinion written by Justice Amy Coney Barrett, the decisions, what we would call liberal versus conservative judges, right? Which leads me to wonder, it used to be the only way we referred to the judges, if we referred to their ideology at all, it was liberal or conservative. Sometimes we'd toss in moderate, right? But now we don't do that anymore. Most of the reporting and talk about the justices or district courts or whatever is Trump appointee, Obama appointee, Biden appointee, Bush appointee. Does that taint the reputation of the courts by planting in people's minds on both sides that, oh, if you're a Trump supporter, got to be a good judge. If you're not a Trump supporter, got to be a bad judge if it was appointed by Trump, and on down the line of presidents.
And yet there have been Trump appointees who have ruled against Donald Trump. The tradition is that the process of picking a federal judge is very political. because this is a chance for a president to have a 30, 40-year influence on the law and this policy in America. But that once they're elected or appointed to the position, the judges follow the rule of law and they do their job to the best of their ability. And while they may have a different take on what the Constitution requires, the originalist versus textualist versus contextualist, that they ultimately follow the law, they follow the Constitution, and that there's a general agreement as to what the Constitution requires, what the rule of law requires. When you emphasize the origin of that judge, who appointed them, as if that matters, then you're doing is you're undermining our support for the rule of law, for the Constitution as a benign document that can meet many needs.
The controversies don't all originate at the U.S. Supreme Court. There was an article recently out of the New York Times. A white nationalist, this was their headline, wrote a law school paper promoting racist views. That was the headline. The New York Times went on to say the University of Florida student won an academic honor after he argued in a paper that the Constitution applies only to white people. It had been argued that the Klan many years ago had made similar arguments. But we live in a time where we're so fractured and where the debate doesn't just happen in the Supreme Court, it's happening everywhere. That got a lot of national coverage. Your thoughts on that, and on a broader context, how are we warped in this age of social media and information and misinformation about being able to have any arguments that are thoughtful when we're constantly manning the ramparts to argue positions that are extreme and arguing with one another constantly?
Well, my take, and I've thought long and hard on this paper and what he's done. When you differ as to the interpretation of the facts, there is room for people to make positions different than your own. They're wrong. You're right, of course. They're wrong. But you can argue or you can accept that they made a good argument. And that's actually what the professor for that class said. He made a good argument.
Right.
He
don't agree with it.
Don't agree with it. Well, he didn't say that.
He didn't say that,
but he says
actually.
he made a good argument. When you differ as to the facts, however, then it's hard sometimes to come up with a right and wrong answer. There are facts that are concrete, that are rooted in the past, that are rooted in history, are rooted in the documents, that are rooted in our understanding of who we are as a nation. And this interpretation of the facts is simply wrong. The founders who wrote the 14th and 15th Amendments were actively seeking to overturn Dred Scott, which said that there were no rights that were granted to African Americans by the founders of the Constitution. So you might say, okay, he's arguing Dred Scott, he's arguing the original Constitution in 1787, and he's arguing that it was a racist group of people who wrote a racially biased document. But then it was amended by people who specifically and explicitly were trying to overcome that opinion, to change that. So he's wrong. So I find myself torn because I want to empower students to take positions that they want and that they believe in, and to see the strength of their argument. But he simply, to my understanding of the facts of the matter, got it wrong. And that he won an award for it is problematical.
So how would you describe today's students?
Challenged.
Because?
They've got a whole bunch of information coming at them from different sources. And that there is no paper of record, someplace where you think, this is the truth. This is the foundation. You know, just because it's in the New York Times doesn't mean it's true anymore. There was a time when if it was in the New York Times, that was truth. That was validity. And so they're faced by misinformation, which is simply wrong information, by disinformation, which is information that is purposefully changed to present a certain position that may or may not be accurate. and they are told, okay, now you have to make sense of all this. And unfortunately, they've been given a tool to make sense of it real easy. They just go to the local AI and ask, what's the answer? And too many students are taking the easy route, as opposed to having to struggle with going through the sources, going through the resources, drawing comparisons between different points of view, and then coming to a conclusion. We try and stress that in our classes, but it's an uphill battle.
How do you fix it?
I don't know. Do you know?
Actually, I do have one thought on how I'd fix, like they talk about how kids coming and taking exams would be used. I go, well, that's why God invented the paper and pencil.
And in fact, my response
had them in the classroom.
My response to AI has been to go old school. Here's a blue book. Here's a question. You've got an hour and a half. Give me an answer, and I will transcribe, transliterate, and try to understand your handwriting. We had gotten completely away from that because it was so much easier to see something typed and that they take their time. But
is that working?
I think so. It's one way where I can tell what it is the students understand, because there's no one telling them what to say. They're saying it themselves in a controlled environment.
How do they respond to doing it that way?
They're not pleased.
Watch out, Professor Crowley sharpening his pencils.
They really would prefer not to have to do this. But I explained to them my reasons why, and they accept it, and they move on.
We're coming to the end of our time, and we still have our Crowley Closer here on Top of Mind, Florida. Sum up any thoughts perhaps we haven't touched on with you, but how we navigate these times. And as you've said, and as Brian said many times over the years, we have had plenty of inflection points here. I think social media has a gravitational effect. You sort of just described it, that is a new factor in all of our discussions or information or misinformation. But final thoughts about how we navigate through these times. And to those particularly watching or listening, say, very interesting, but doesn't affect what I'm doing today. Doesn't affect my life directly. What do you say? What are your final thoughts?
I think it affects their life quite directly, because what government does affects people's lives. There are people who have been in this country for 30 years, never broken the law, never thought that they would be the ones who would be arrested and deported. That's for the criminals. That's for the bad people. I'm living, I've got a job. I pay my taxes. I bought a house. I've married a citizen. My kids are citizens. And now they're discovering that the law says they are criminals, at least in the eyes of the people who are enforcing the law now, and that they are subject to arrest and deportation. And so
and even challenges to birthright citizenship. That'll be for another day, but that's part of that.
We could fill another half hour on that topic alone. And so people's response about their lives are changing because of these attitudes that the government is promoting, and the challenges against them, whether they're accepted or not. These debates, in other words, matter.
On that note, Dr. Charles Zelden, Professor of History and Politics, Nova Southeastern University, we appreciate you taking time to be with us.
My pleasure.
And as always, Brian Crowley, take it away, sir.
Well, first off, thank you for being here. We appreciate it a lot. And thank you to everybody who watches and listens to Top of Mind Florida. We've had some fantastic comments from people who have called us and talked to us about how great our video production is by Comar. They do a fantastic job. Yeah. Bravo to Comar. And again, thank you so much for watching and listening, and I hope you'll invite others to come and join us on this show. And thank you very much.